I've been reading Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime, which is about his childhood and his adolescence living in South Africa. The title refers to the fact that his father was Swiss and his mother was black, so that their relationship was illegal under the racial laws that were in place in South Africa at that time. While he was growing up, Noah taught himself to speak several languages because that made it easier to get along in a country that has at least 35 languages. He explains that this was something that the government did not encourage during the period between 1948 and the early 1990s under the institutionalized racism that was known as apartheid. South Africa was ruled at the time by a small white minority, and the government believed that the one way to keep the much larger black majority from asserting its rights was to keep the people separated by language. As a result, children were taught only the language of their own lineage: Zulu, Bantu, Setswana, Xhosa, and so forth. That enforced difference in language itself created tensions among the black population, and that kept them from uniting and helped the white supremacist government stay in power. This situation in South Africa is sometimes compared to the scene that's described in the book of Genesis, in which the human race that had descended from Noah's sons, not Trevor Noah, but the Noah of the ark, spoke one language as they grew in numbers and migrated after the great flood. When they reached a place called Shinar, probably in Babylonia, they settled there and decided to build a tower that would reach all the way to heaven. And this was a sign of their pride and their arrogance. The story goes that God wanted to remind those people who they were and who he was. And so he put a stop to their building project by confusing their languages so that they could no longer understand each other and were eventually dispersed over the earth. These two stories come to mind because of the first reading in today's Mass, St. Luke's account of the event that we know as Pentecost. This event, in which the Holy Spirit, as Jesus had promised, descended on the apostles, is also known as the birthday of the church. And this is what St. Luke writes about the apostles at the time. All were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in different tongues as the Spirit enabled them to proclaim. Now they were devout Jews from every nation under heaven staying in Jerusalem. And at this sound, they gathered in a large crowd, but they were confused because each one heard them speaking in his own language. They were astounded. And in amazement, they asked, "Are not all these people who are speaking Galileans? Then how does each of us hear them in his own native language?" Well, in this case, multiple languages didn't divide people, as in South Africa and in ancient Babylonia. On the contrary, the infant church, in the persons of the apostles, speaking different languages, actually united people. The many languages of Pentecost were the first sign of something that was foreshadowed by the visit of the Magi to the infant Jesus. Namely, that Jesus' ministry was a ministry to all nations, a ministry to all people. In other words, that it was universal, that God's love does not discriminate among people in any way. The gift of the Spirit that the apostles received at Pentecost is a gift that each one of us receives at baptism. And so is the commission that they received to be brothers and sisters to people of all nations without distinction. In our own time, even in the church, differences in language often causes tension among people, as does skin color, mode of dress, and other traditions. When we witness these tensions, it's time to remember what we celebrate today, the very thing that St. Paul wrote about in his letter to the infant church in Corinth. As a body is one, though it has many parts, and all the parts of the body, though many, are one body, so also Christ. For in one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, whether Jews or Greeks, slave or free, and we were all given to drink of one Spirit.